Is it a gun or is it a cell phone case that looks like a gun? We'll talk about it on the program. Could Candace Owens, the young conservative superstar, become another Martin Luther King Jr.? We'll talk about that as well. And President Trump, in his usual straight talk, has a lot of people scratching their head about what does he mean? Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilberg, your host. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I invite two everyday Americans to the program to come on board and, as I always say, let their hair down and chew on topics that are thought-provoking, conversation starters, and certainly Americana. We have Honora that joins us. She's from Pennsylvania, and she is retired now and an author. She writes books now in her retirement. Hello, Honora.
Hello, Terry. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. And we have Mitchell. Mitchell is a small business owner of a videography company. Hello, Mitchell.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Well, you bet. And here we go. President Trump, in his usual straight talk, sometimes I call it guttural because he just kind of spits things out sometimes, recently said that a trade deal with China absolutely going to happen, but he thinks presently that China needs more time and isn't ready to negotiate yet. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's kind of a tight statement, and yet it is pretty thorough, and yet he keeps the window open for bringing China around without abusing China's feelings in any way. So it's pretty succinct. He said it with confidence and with authority. And in one sentence, he rejected the commentary from so many talking heads, kind of the negative commentary, that doubt America will win the trade war with China. So, Mitchell, I'll start with you. He kept that window open, in other words, saying, look, it's going to happen, but just not yet. I'm ahead of the game. I'm kind of waiting on them. Is he a master at language because he's so pithy and to the point, or could he use certainly some refresher courses on being loquacious?
Well, the left likes to throw around the term that he's being unpresidential. I'll tell you what's unpresidential: capitulation. And that's what we had for about 8 years. So, no, I don't think he's doing anything wrong. In fact, if you read The Art of the Deal, his book, it explains all of this. His tactic has always been to go in hard and unreasonable. Then your compromise ends up being what you wanted in the first place. Look, the Chinese said the trade wars would hurt us, except it's their economy that's suffering now, not ours. So suddenly they're back at the table. It was the same with Canada. I mean, did anybody think we were going to lose that deal? They export 85% of their stuff to us. We export 15% to them. Who's going to win that argument? I mean,
exactly.
The left hates everything he's doing, okay? But all their doom and gloom predictions have fizzled. They talked about how world leaders didn't respect him. Well, they do now, because they've come to the realization that America is not going to be the village bicycle anymore, and it's long overdue. I mean, NATO payments are up. There's a European version of MAGA taking place, and we finally got out of the world's worst trade deal, NAFTA.
Honora, one thing that struck me, and has since he's taken office, is that he is a total brawler. He's a total showboater. He goes out of bounds. He surprises everybody. What's he going to say next? He's ahead of the press with tweeting. And when you sort of clue in to what he's actually doing, like Mitchell was saying, you step back and go and say to yourself, that's actually pretty brilliant. He's leading the charge, outfoxing what typically the media, for sure, and a lot of Americans think is presidential, and tacking to the right, being a nationalist, trying to get America great again like it used to be, and in his mind, hearkening back to when America was the shiny city on the hill. But it sure is a laborious effort. So, should we just ignore the words and just heed the substance and keep going?
Yes, I think we should. I've learned that he is very strategic in his thinking and in what he says. In the China incident, he really is trying to save face with President Xi. And he understands that culture. And so he says, let's give them a little more time. So that is working because while China's economy is going down, as Mitchell said, and he also knows his statistics much better than I, but he does try to understand the person who he's talking to. And yes, while he might say things off the cuff that seem unpresidential, they're certainly the minority of his statements, because he, unlike the past presidents who have been involved in long-term goals, let's get these despotic countries to become democracies. Let's get them to adhere to human rights. They delineated sharply between allies and adversaries. He doesn't do that. His strategic thinking, and I haven't read The Art of the Deal, but I would imagine he addresses this in getting to know the culture of the person, their thinking, and work on that. And he'll do anything to get to his goal. And he's gotten to his goal. I was shocked when I picked up the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago and saw that, and we didn't really hear about this, where he got Angela Merkel to only buy, I think, maybe 10%, 20%. I don't remember the figures of oil from Russia, and to get most of the oil from on Germany's side from the United States. Well, that's huge. How did he do that?
Yes. Yes. And we don't hear about it because the media is not on his side. Mitchell, back to you. Language issue, back to this idea of how he gets information out. He gets tongue-tied and he repeats himself. And yet it's very kind of base, and the average American hears him and understands him. Do you think some of that is because he wants to bite his tongue because he knows he has national secrets and he's got to phrase it a certain way, and he just doesn't, he gets bollocksed up in the tongue? Whereas Obama was so slippery, half the time I just thought, wow, he's pulling the wool over people. Trump doesn't pull the wool over people. He's crystal clear there, but he repeats. He'll be on book with a speech and be pretty fluid with the teleprompter, and then get to the end of a sentence and say that sentence over and over again, sort of to drive it home. And sometimes I think it's because he's concerned that he might say too much, as in national secrets, state secrets. I'm
sure as president, your head is full of all kinds of information, and on the fly, you have to try to figure out what you can and can't say. I find this refreshing. Okay, I find the fact that he doesn't use a teleprompter very often refreshing. He's talking to me. He's not giving me some hollow speech. The other thing is, anyone who's ever taken a speech course, they teach you the way you approach this is you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and at the end, you tell them what you told them. So the fact that he's repeating things is actually strategic in terms of making points when you're giving a speech. I've used that technique in several of my presentations over the years. But if he does repeat himself, hey, I'm starting to do that and I'm younger than him. So, I'm prepared to cut him some slack there. But the thing is this, I like so many Americans, I got tired of perfectly polished, empty suits. And we've had quite a few of those on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm just happy to have a guy that talks and is real and delivers his message in a clear and concise way. And I'm sure as he starts to make a point, he suddenly says to himself, whoops, I got to stop this part because the rest is national security secrets. I like his brash approach. I really do. And I talk to a lot of business owners and they like it too. We're tired of the namby-pamby thing. So, Mitchell, on that note, I want to go back to you. Has he changed, or when his presidency is over in 2 years or even 6 years, has he changed what being Republican actually is? Well, I think he has, but I think what he's taught the Republicans is, and they were slow to come out of the blocks on this one. See, they couldn't understand this, just like the left. They kept looking at the American people saying, how can you support this man? They've got it backwards. We don't support President Trump. Trump supports us. He's the first president that listened to the American people and decided to address the things that are important to us. That's why our support for him doesn't die, because all he's doing is using our playbook, just his techniques to deliver it. And that's why it's never going to change. And the left is clueless when it comes to this. And so was the Republican establishment, but they are beginning to come around, because nothing works better than success to get somebody on board. Now, Paul Ryan's a lost cause. I mean, I gave up on him years ago. He's never going to change. He's a never Trumper, and he'll never change. But Mitch McConnell is definitely rotating around. There's nothing like success to get you on board.
And not only that, Lindsey Graham, and I think some of that is because his best friend, John McCain, is deceased now, who always was, marketed himself as a maverick and would go across the aisle. And Lindsey Graham kind of followed suit because McCain was a senior statesman and all of that. But I see Lindsey Graham doing nothing now except being a cheerleader for Donald Trump, Honora. Now, I want to ask you this. I read I think it was the Atlantic, Honora, and you don't have to have read this, but I'm just going to reference it, that Donald Trump is, in fact, changing what Republican is or will when he is out of office. And they described it as this, the Moses touch, planting a stake in the ground and thereby dividing the landscape. And their assessment was, that's not good because now our nation is divided. But my response to that is, by the time he's out of office, he may be putting a stake in the ground now and dividing the landscape. But by the time he's out of office, the landscape will have tacked to the right. Your thoughts?
Well, I certainly hope that's true. And coming from the Atlantic, of course, I would expect the second part of their statement. I was excited by the first part, but then, of course, they went back to their usual leftist agenda in this division. I hope that happens. And it will only happen in the Republican Party. And as a new Republican, fairly new since Obama, I can say this, that most of them, the senators, not necessarily the congressmen, except for the conservative group, are wimps. They're just not full of vim and vigor and fearsome. They are so worried about their being elected again. And I think that he has made a difference in the Republican Party. You mentioned Lindsey Graham. I was just astounded how Lindsey Graham let loose at the Kavanaugh.
Me too. We need to leave it there. Good points all. I was astonished too, and I'm glad that he did, because he really helped, I think, push Kavanaugh over the finish line to success. Let's leave it there. When we return, new topic. Is it a gun or is it a cell phone case? You won't believe what is passing as a cell phone case. Next on Think America with Terry Gilbert. ThinkAmericaRadio.com. Subscribe to our podcast. We're back on Think America. A cell phone case that looks like a gun? Yes. A new novelty cell phone case that many teens are using for their mobile phones actually looks like a gun. And if you look at the phone from one angle, it looks like a normal phone case. But if you hold it to your ear or you carry this case with your phone in it, if you carry it in your back pocket, it looks like a pistol. Of course, combine that with suspicious behavior on the part of a teen, and a teen could be in a lot of trouble. This is actually troubling to me. I'm libertarian on these things, as my audience knows, on these types of things. But in one case, the gun caused a lockdown, quote unquote gun. I should say that, air quotes, quote unquote gun, meaning the case of which the cell phone was in caused a lockdown at a school. Mitchell, you're a gun advocate, Second Amendment advocate. What do you say about this gun case? Or excuse me, the cell phone case that looks like a gun. I've got to say, because it's so omnipresent in my mind when you see pictures of this, Mitchell, it does look like a pistol.
Well, I think this is a Darwin Award moment. I think anybody with a lick of sense should probably give this some more thought before they buy it. I do find the idea troubling in the sense that it's not wise. But to be honest with you, Terry, I have a different take on this. I found law enforcement's response to this even more troubling. I was very disappointed by the sheriff's department in California saying that someone could potentially get shot depending on their actions when they're around law enforcement officers. And I'm thinking to myself, let's hope our officers are better trained than that, or we're going to end up with a flurry of lawsuits. This student in Florida that got arrested, first of all, the case was bright, hot pink, not black. So it doesn't look like a gun. Does that mean they should have it? No. But the point is, they were still arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. Arrested for having a hot pink plastic case. I think law enforcement's gotta have a long, hard talk with themselves. I mean, these parents, if I was a parent, I'd file a huge lawsuit against the police over this. It's totally ridiculous. We cannot allow cops to be this stupid. I understand taking some action against the student, but arresting them and charging them with a misdemeanor,
I agree.
You got open carry in Florida.
I agree that went too far, but kids are also buying them in the color black. So, Honora, we say we're here to help the police. The police are in a brave new world with all the digital electronic stuff, obviously. And they say, on balance, they say stuff like this can cause confusion. So, are you for an item like this? Or should we agree with most police saying, look, parents, tell your kids or anybody, don't buy this?
I am certainly against this. The schools do have the power to ban this kind of cell case, a phone cell case, and we can't stop the manufacturer from manufacturing it. But certainly in the heat of a shooting or what is perceived as a possible shooting, the police might not really think, well, it's pink, but not black, like a gun is. So I'm going to differentiate. Things don't happen that way when you're under pressure and possibly under fire. And it's also making a mockery of the value of guns. It becomes like a play toy. It's a cool item rather than what a gun stands for and how we should treat guns. So I definitely think that students should not be allowed to carry it, and I don't see the point of anybody carrying it.
Well, not to mention, it's not just the police that can be confused, but others can get the wrong impression. A principal can say, what is that? And all of a sudden we've got a lockdown. All of a sudden security agents are knocking on the homeroom and saying, okay, Billy, come with me. It creates this kind of false panic maybe, but keeping up with all the new hip and hipster things that are out there is impossible. It's just impossible. There's so many things. So I am more with you, Honora. I don't think that this is necessary. And for kids that are always, not always, but most of them are high school and college kids are so liberal and that hate guns. Why are they doing this, Honora? Why would they want this? Just to egg on police and create havoc, egg on their principal, egg on their parents, create, something that can be very confusing and can create very negative scenarios. Why do they want to do that if most young people are liberal and peaceniks? Honora.
Well, it's just the cool thing to do. Like when I was growing up, we had jackets that were luminous. They were made now that wasn't dangerous, but this is just a cool thing to do. Mm-hmm. It could be a statement against guns. Who knows the way teenagers think today?
All right, let's leave it there. I'm looking at my clock. I would say to the American audience, yes, we brought it as a talk topic because it's a great one, but take a pass on buying this. That's what I would say. All right, when we come back, my interview with an award-winning film producer on the new shoot. It's a documentary, Normandy Jump. 2019, and how she's gathering so many vintage aircraft, vintage folks from World War II, and young people to jump out of airplanes to reenact the 75th anniversary next year of D-Day. Stick around. Welcome back to Think America with Terry Gilbert. Let's switch gears now and bring CJ Machado to the air. She is an award-winning producer and photojournalist, and she is above all an advocate for veterans, calls herself a humanitarian. She is the producer of a new documentary, Normandy Jump 2019, remembering the successful air invasion over Normandy on D-Day, presently in pre-production with military pilots and real World War II veterans to remember, which will happen next year, the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion in France. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's
all right. You are working with the Air Force's D-Day doll. That's an aircraft, right? And with the World War I airborne demonstration, World War II airborne demonstration team, correct, for your documentary, Normandy Jump 2019. Is that right?
Yes. They've been terrific. D-Day doll is out in Riverside. It's a C-47 that actually was part of the Operation Overlord almost 75 years ago.
You are still in pre-production, and you've got these old airplanes, and you've got greatest generation soldiers and their stories, and yet you have modern or more contemporary or young players in all of this, and they are learning to jump out of these old aircraft because you're going to film all of this happening next June in Normandy. Is that the idea behind the Normandy Jump 2019?
Yes, it's going to be the largest presentation, largest living historical presentation of our lifetime. And there'll be vintage C-47s from all across the world, all allied forces. They're going to fill the skies of Normandy, and we will have hundreds of paratroopers involved, civilian parachutists, all dressed in World War II uniforms to reenact D-Day, Operation Overlord.
Does France know you're coming?
Yes. There's a gentleman by the name of Peter Braun from the Netherlands that has organized the entire event, along with different facets with World War II Airborne Demonstration Team out in Oklahoma, Frederickson, Oklahoma, and they've been terrific. And they're the ones who train civilian parachutists to prepare for the Normandy jump.
All right. So you mentioned Oklahoma. Has there been a big practice already in Oklahoma? Are you part of that? Are you going to be jumping yourself? How many are jumping out of aircraft? How is all of this going to work?
It's an organizational effort made by many countries, but yes, I just participated in the most recent World War II airborne demonstration jump training out in Frederick, Oklahoma, with Colonel Raymond Steele and Rodney Roycroft. And they basically take someone like myself, and there were some special forces in the programming and civilian World War II enthusiasts. They train us, and we jump out of these vintage aircrafts in preparation for Normandy. Some will participate in the Normandy, but you do have to have a certain amount of jumps prepared for that, which is 10. That is France's recommendations, or rules, I should say.
Did you actually jump out of a plane while in Oklahoma, or are you just weightlifting, or are you doing aerobics? What is the training like, and how many men are also doing all of this? And how do you get weeded out?
The training was very intense, very thorough, very difficult. Thank God we have the best instructors, my goodness. And they take you from the basics of the parachute parts to how to parachute, your PLFs, which is the parachute landing fall technique, which is very important, not to hurt yourself. And then they go over the safety procedures. And if you cannot pass any of those parts of the training, they will not allow you to jump. And they're very passionate about what they do. They want to make sure you do it safely. And they work you through it, hone in on your craft. So not everybody makes it. Not everybody can make it. And they're not physically.
So, CJ, you didn't exactly jump out of an airplane yet, or did you practice that already in Oklahoma?
I did earn my wings. I did jump out of that darn aircraft 5 times. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I have the utmost respect for our paratroopers, our active paratroopers. Jesus Lord, I don't know how they do it, but the instructors, what you hear when you're at the exit, when you're ready to jump out of that damn plane, it is unbelievable scary.
Wow. I'm impressed. Yeah. I'm impressed. I think I would need, a bunch of buddies for the buddy system. They would have to push me out and hold me all the way down. Let's go back to this idea that you're getting vintage C-47s from the World War II era, other paratroopers, everybody in uniform to reenact the D-Day. I read either it was on your website or somewhere that you had 1.4 million spectators that are expected to attend. This coordination must be extraordinary.
And there's many people involved, and I couldn't tell you all the people involved. I just know some of the people involved. The Commemorative Air Force plays a really big part. A lot of their aircraft they're allowing to go there. That's all Brother, D-Day Doll, Ready for Duty. There's a few others, and it is an incredible event. And the documentary is to memorialize the sacrifices of our greatest generation and to celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day as well.
I think I told you my father was a part of the greatest generation. He's deceased, but on D-Day over Normandy, he actually was sent out in a glider pilot. He was a glider pilot, and he took troops over enemy lines on the eve of D-Day. Are you going to be bringing in the effort from glider pilots on that historic day as well?
Absolutely. But, we'll have to talk after the program because I don't know how many are alive. Not many made it from what I understand. And your father, I take it, made it.
Yes, he did make it. Most of the gliders, and this is a very sad historical fact, but many of them crashed upon getting into trees as they were trying to glide down over enemy lines or upon impact. Some of the soldiers inside did not die, but some of the pilots did. Some did, some didn't. And it's true that not many made it. So that's very tragic. Okay, what do you need in terms of funding on all of this? Tell me a little bit about where you're at. I know everybody needs money for various projects, but are you well on your way? And tell me also about working with our government to make sure this is enacted properly with the French government.
Well, I don't believe that I can go into details in regards to our government versus their government. That would be done through Captain Rodney Roycroft. He would be he'd be the best person to talk about that and that coordination. I can tell you funding has been very difficult. It's been self-funded thus far. We are very passionate. I'm working with Speed and Angels Productions. And if anyone would like to help sponsor, invest, it's a great project. We'd love to have you be a part of it. And that information is on www.normandyjump2019.com if anyone is interested in helping with that, because we are very passionate about our patriotism. We're very proud of what our American troops have done for us, and we want to preserve that history. And there's not that many left, as you know.
This is such a feat that you have undertaken. I'm so proud, CJ Machado, of what you have done. We're down to a minute. If anybody is listening to this program and they also want to be part of your production and they know how to jump or they are fit to jump, do they contact you through the website? Because I'm sure listening to this national program, there will be people that say, I want to do that too in honor of the 75th celebration of D-Day. Quickly.
And I want them to help out as well, and we'd love to have them play a part. So in order to get in contact with us, it's www.normandyjump2019.com. There is a contact button there and a donation button there. And also, if anyone would like to participate as a civilian parachutist reenactor, please contact wwiadt.org. It is a fantastic school if you want to actually participate in Normandy.
Right, we need to leave it there. Find more from CJ Machado, Normandy Jump 2019.com. Good luck to you. Don't break a leg. And next year, break a leg.
Thanks for having me on the program.
You're listening to Think America with Terry Gilbert. Back on Think America with Terry Gilbert, where we reason first and then converse. With my ensemble, it's Honora and Mitchell. What do you think of this? Candace Owens. Many people know who she is now. She's a beautiful young Black woman, 29 years old, uber conservative. She's a rising star. She's also the communications director for Turning Point USA. And she created, after one of her talks not too long ago, an idea popped into her head called Blexit, Blexit, modeled after the term in Britain, Brexit, BR for Britain and exit. She said, why not have a BL as in black exit? Black America deserves better in her view. She is a conservative. She wants to free them from their idea that they need to be part of the Democrat Party. Now, recently, Mitchell, on another edition of Think America, I interviewed Diamond and Silk. They said they're woke. They woke when they saw President Trump come down the elevator, and they cut ties with the Democrat Party. And now they're big advocates like Candace Owens of the Republican Party. Let's talk first with you. Is Blexit a good thing to piggyback off after the term Brexit to bring blacks from the Democrat Party over to the Republican Party, Mitchell?
Absolutely. First of all, she credits Nigel Farage because he was giving his talk about Brexit when she was behind stage, and that's what gave her the inspiration for it. But the truth is it follows also on the hashtag walk away movement, and they're both gaining momentum. She's absolutely right about the Democratic Party. I've been trying to explain to people for years that in the 1950s, marriage rates among blacks were higher than whites. And then along comes Johnson with his Great Society and welfare, and we ended up destroying the integrity of black families. I mean, we're responsible for this. And so, yes, she refers to it as being on the plantation. You can call it whatever you want. I think the Democrats take blacks for granted. I think they expect them to vote that way. And as she says, you're born a Democrat if you're black. And I agree that needs to change. I will say this, and this is just my thoughts. In order to be successful, I think she's going to have to motivate blacks to accept responsibility for their own actions. And I believe she will do that because this movement cannot devolve into one of these black power type movements with lots of demands. It's got to be the renaissance that she's describing, an awakening of sorts. And I believe it is.
Honora, she calls it, as Mitch just said, a renaissance or a formal declaration of independence to be free of this notion that if you're born black, you absolutely find a D on your ballot and you vote D, 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 D all the way down. Her website on this is quite impressive with many black speakers, young people, people that really don't have a lot of name recognition in America, but basically said, I'm out of here. How do you see this? Is this the way to cut the ties and have them be a free thinker, this Blexit?
Absolutely. I do believe in Blexit, and she seems to be the one who is leading it. She is young. She's a millennia or millennium, not quite sure the term there. And so she will get a lot of people to follow her. And the fact that I think I just heard 40% of blacks are now for Republicans. I hope that statistic is right. That's wonderful. I have a friend who is black, who is now in his 80s. He's from Georgia originally, and he was very active as a Democrat in the Georgian Democratic Party. And he and his friends, black friends, who were active at that time this is in 1960, were selected to be delegates to the Democratic convention in which Carter was running against John Kennedy. And they went off brim and fire and excited. And what happened was totally turned them off. All the Democrat Party talked about was getting the Black vote, and they were going to do it by expanding Medicaid, expanding food stamps, all the government-sponsored agencies that really did little to give them incentive and, as you mentioned, personal responsibility.
It's so interesting when you go to the website, because everything you just said, Honora, is repeated on the website in 2 words: welfare system. And it talks about how the welfare system helps people fail and keeps them on the plantation party. These are strong words, but they are coming from the mouths of Black Americans saying they are done. And in a modern society where so many are educated from where Blacks were in America, they want to think for themselves, they want better choices, and they want out, just like the walk away movement. All right, good discussion. We'll hear what Megan has to say. Megan Porth has to say about this and her Change Your Life technology segment at the end of this show. I'm Terry Gilbert. Stick around. ThinkAmericaRadio.com. We're back on Think America. Megan Porth joins us, as she does every week on every show, at the 4th segment of every show, to talk about her thoughts. So, Megan, you're a millennial. Candace Owens is a millennial. What do you think of her, and what do you think of her movement now, Blexit, to have Blacks exit the Democrat Party and turn Republican and conservative?
I love it. And I can actually relate with her because as a millennial libertarian, I don't have a ton of friends, honestly, who are excited about my ideology and my political stance. But more than just kind of relating with her on a personal level, what I really love about what she's talking about is the idea that you don't have to vote along very specific party lines based upon your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your religion. You basically get to make those decisions based on your own preferences. I like the conversation that she's starting. I like that she's saying that we haven't been served by our traditional Democratic Party, and so therefore we need to look other places. The thing that I think that maybe she's young and she can find eventually, I have a feeling she'll eventually become a libertarian, but that's just wishful thinking. What I would love to see her talking about is not that maybe the answer is to then just switch parties and go to the Republican Party, but that in order to empower minorities and women in this country, we actually need to be looking at ourselves. The power comes from within. The power, the greatest minority in this country is the individual. And for us to be able to make those changes in our community and make those changes within ourselves and with the businesses that we're running and the families that we're creating, we actually need to stop looking at specific parties. So as much as I applaud her saying that she wants to leave the Democratic Party simply because she doesn't have to vote along those specific party lines just because she's a Black female. I really would love to see her eventually move in the direction of saying, and guess what? The answer may not be the Republican Party either. The answer may come from our own community. It could be a third party. It could be no party at all, but it's based on individuality and it's based on freedom and independence. And that's where I think she'll eventually make it once she kind of runs through all of this. But I love the idea that she's challenging this. She's smart.
I know she is smart. And I know that you always advocate for being a free thinker on individual issues. And I like what you have said on the program in episodes past, Megan, on how sometimes you're torn because some issues are that complicated that it's
right.
Not necessarily a libertarian knee-jerk reaction to get the answer on any given issue, that you have to think it through. So what she's trying to do more than anything is get Blacks to use their minds and think through the myriad and complexity of all of the issues that are upon us presently. But to do that first, she sounds to me like some of the narrative from Dinesh D'Souza's movies that talk about the welfare system, and the Dems are in the plantation party, and sick of sick of blacks killing each other, sick of victim-like policies, and how they've just been aligned with Democrats, which goes back in history. And it was the Republicans that actually was anti-slavery. So what she's trying to do is create this wake up, or use the term woke, in an effort then to get them to become free thinkers. And she believes comes 2020, that result will stand on its own, and Republicans and conservatives will continue to be dominant in America.
Yeah. And I love the idea of her saying, go ahead, like you said, use that critical thinking, make the decision on your own.
All right. We're down to about a minute. What do you got, Megan, in Change Your Life Technology, sponsored by yourcontractshop.com?
Well, I don't know if you knew this, Terry, but our planet should grow to the size of about 10 billion by 2050. Right now, we're at about 7.5 billion. Well, the problem is how are we going to feed all these people? The United States is actually the number one exporter of food, but believe it or not, the number two is the Netherlands. And the reason they're able to keep up with that massive amount of demand is because they use what's called climate-controlled farms. And the climate-controlled farms are basically, it's innovation and entrepreneurship brought together in almost like a Silicon Valley style. Their outputs are greater. They use greenhouses. They're able to decrease their dependency by 90%, cut antibiotics by 60%, and almost eliminated pesticide use. I would love to see more of this in the U.S.
I didn't know Netherlands was second.
Yeah, it's surprising. It's tiny.
I would have said Germany or France, actually. Brazil, maybe. All right. Thank you, Megan, always, for being on the program. Thanks to Honora from Pennsylvania, and thanks to Mitchell from the Southwest, and to all my listening audience. We appreciate you. We embrace you. We welcome you always. Find us at thinkamericaradio.com on our website, and subscribe to our podcast. Think America. Reason first, then converse. See you next time. Did President Trump politicize a tragedy in the synagogue shooting? And in a recent PBS survey, the novel To Kill a Mockingbird came out on top as best loved. We'll discuss why. Plus, Change Your Life Technology. Megan will be on board with latest technology that changes millions of people's lives for the better. Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilbert, your host. Welcome to America's Radio Town Hall. Every week, I invite real Americans to come to their microphone and your ear to download on what they think with me are the pertinent issues, thought-provoking conversation starters, and we chew on all things Americana. This week, there is Mitchell I've invited to the air. Mitchell is a small business owner. He owns a videography company, video and audio. Welcome, Mitchell, to the program.
Happy to be here.
And Honora is with us. She is retired. She's from the East Coast, and she is an author. Hello, Honora. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Terry. So happy to be with you.
All right, let's get started. When President Trump, I want to pose this question first. When he expressed sorrow after the Tree of Life Synagogue mass murder attack, he stated that if an armed defender had been present, some or all of those 11 people that were murdered, some of them might still be alive today. In fact, the whole attack might have been prevented. Now, as you might have seen, Honora and Mitchell, within minutes, liberal pundits attacked him for politicizing a tragedy and advocating for more assault weapons and not waiting to comment about all the facts until they were known. And I sat there for my part and I said, but what conceivable facts could be known which would negate the obvious truth with which we've learned time and time again through a lot of bloodshed, and that is that this synagogue and other places of worship and other places of education, places of learning, these places are gun-free zones, and therefore they are, in fact, vulnerable to gun attacks. So, Mitchell, let me go to you first. Would an armed defender, in your opinion, have made a real life-saving difference? Just to be there, just to stand there?
Terry, an armed defender always makes a difference. The one thing the left does not want you to know is that the guns are used to prevent death more often than they're used to kill people. The FBI's published statistics on crime have proven this year in and year out. But that doesn't fit the narrative. And as you know, they're a one-trick pony on the left. One, everything is Trump's fault. And two, even if an asteroid was hurtling towards Earth, their solution would be, we got to take the guns. With regard to gun-free zones, by their very nature, they are unsafe places. I mean, I avoid them like a plague. My message to businesses has always been, I don't do business with gun-free zones. When you put that sign up, you make me a target. Now, some places don't have signs, like schools, synagogues, churches. But nonetheless, I mean, I would much rather hang out in a place where nobody is sure whether anybody has a gun.
Well, what about just your average supermarket or strip mall? I mean, how do you know? We travel the 50 states, we're not just in one spot, and it's hard to know which ones have armed guards that you see a gun or maybe a concealed gun.
Well, the fact is, I remember the first state that got concealed carry permits was Florida, and everybody immediately said, whoa, what happened here? All of a sudden, we got all these attacks on foreign tourists arriving at the airport. Well, yeah, that's the only group for a fact doesn't have a gun. They just got off an international flight. The point is, every state that gets concealed permits sees a reduction in violent crime, because the fact of the matter is, you don't know, if you're a perpetrator, whether or not this particular area you've selected may in fact have an armed citizen. It's that unknown that serves as a deterrent, much like nuclear weapons do for countries.
Honora, it is human nature that we guard what we value. For example, public officials, especially the president, every president, as they come into elected office, if they're a major candidate, and after they leave the presidency, has the use of the Secret Service. Celebrities have bodyguards. Banks have armed officers in the bank. If it's a jewelry store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, you're damn certain there's going to be a security agent there. Valuable homes have security systems. Now, pundits comment a lot that there should be no anti-Semitism. But in some respects, that is a pipe dream. I'm going to ask you this. When might that happen? You told me when I booked you for the show, you're Jewish.
Yes, I am Jewish. And this incident is particularly heart-rending to me. Anti-Semitism historically has been going on since ancient times. The Jews did not believe in Christianity, and therefore I believe they were singled out and continue to be singled out up until today. When the press called President Trump out on his mentioning that there was no armed guard there, I just thought that was ridiculous. When is defending yourself political? Even the Bible has passages which said that people must defend themselves. And let's face it, Terry, we are now Israel. And by that, I mean, we are under threat just as the Israelis are under threat. When you go to Israel, you go into a shopping mall, you are searched. Your bag is searched, your backpack, whatever. There is an armed guard there and several armed guards. And who knows, as Mitchell said, maybe more. When you go to a place of worship, there is an armed guard. So for the press to continue with this political nonsense about Trump stating it, my first reaction was, when I heard about the shooting, well, where was the armed guard? Duh.
Duh.
Yes, duh.
Where was the talk that it was a Jewish ER doctor and Jewish nurses that saved his life and treated and saved Robert Bowers, the shooter's life? He shouted out online that all Jews are children of Satan. He shouted out how he was going in, Mitchell. He said he couldn't stand this anymore. But interestingly enough, with him, he didn't have a big online presence. He's kind of a loner, drove a truck. From what I read about him, dropped out of high school, didn't have much of an education, so kind of got indoctrinated in the online chat of anti-Semitism. So it was kind of a surprise in some respects to see how a person and there was no footprint. 20 days prior, he started to have a footprint. But before that, nothing. So that was a little odd. In any event, there wasn't a lot of talk about how a Jewish staff saved his life. And there wasn't a lot of talk about his online presence. There wasn't a lot of talk about any of that. We didn't really know much about him. What we did know is that Trump is racist. Trump is to blame. And of course, we have been in this election cycle. And so, like you said before, Trump is the culprit.
Well, yes, he's the easy target. Well, he's actually the target they want. It doesn't really matter what the issue is. One of the things that concerns me more than anything was the comments by the Pittsburgh mayor. I mean, I found those absolutely scary. His statement that officials should look to make plans to directly control access to guns. Wow, that's like a dog whistle for give us the power to decide who gets one. In other words, the Second Amendment, we should just suspend that. That kind of talk scares me. I'm with Trump with regard to the guy who did this. I think we should go with the maximum sentence and hammer this guy as hard as possible. And as far as him not having a footprint, I'm concerned that that's going to be the norm going forward. Once they figure out that people are watching that sort of stuff, these people are going to go off the grid and they're going to pop up out of nowhere. So, with regard to this, a lot of people don't realize this. One of the largest gun groups in the country is Jews for Guns. I've been associated with people that belong to that group for many years. I think these people, they understand the threat. They have the best airport security. They get it because, as Honora pointed out, they live it every day. And I think maybe we should start modeling some things that they do.
Honora, are you familiar with Jews for Guns?
Yes, actually I am. It's a wonderful organization. And I'm so glad, Mitchell, that you mentioned it. Unfortunately, most Jews are not members of that organization because most Jews in this country are a Democrat. I won't go into the reasons why I think that they are still Democrats and anti-guns, but that's the problem that I see with synagogues. And of course, the other places that should have guards, such as shopping malls and private stores and so forth, it's all part of this anti-gun culture, which is terribly, terribly detrimental to our society. As far as anti-Semitism goes, there are more anti-Semitic acts performed among hate crimes. This is according to an FBI report. I think it's 56% of hate crimes are against Jews. But the media doesn't report them, of course, and people think that anti-Islamic crimes are higher, but that's not true. It's the anti-Semitism, and this is in the United States. So we Jews have to wake up. Many conservative Jews are already woken up, as are the Jews who belong to this gun group. But we're still not in the majority. And it's a problem, Terry. It's a really serious problem because
I did notice that a lot of the Jews that are prominent on the left said very little about the synagogue shooting, Honora. In other words, the Hollywood types, the New York types, the big Jews in the Washington Beltway types, those in Seattle and Los Angeles as well, San Francisco as well. Do you think they're just silent to let this just blow over so that they don't have to deviate from their ideology?
Yes. Also, they're denying reality because, as you mentioned in the beginning, they have their bodyguards, but that's okay. Now, this particular synagogue had undergone a training session from the Department of Homeland that has a specific grant program and training session for synagogues. And they had undergone that. And it was recommended that they have an armed guard. I guess they chose to ignore it. which is to their detriment. And that's what made me so furious when I heard about the shooting. So the JCRC, which is the Jewish Community Relations Council, Terry, is a big Jewish organization in the country. And they also have recommended that all synagogues have armed guards. Well, they complain it's too much money or whatever, but what price security?
What price security? Mitchell, we're down to a minute. I'll leave you with the last word on this topic. Go.
I agree with everything Honora just said, and I do think that that Jews are going to have to face this unpleasant reality. And I don't blame them for not wanting to arm up at synagogues, but I think we're going to have to do that, and it's unfortunate, and I feel for them.
When we come back, we'll be talking about a recent PBS survey giving the nod to Kill a Mockingbird, the novel, coming out as top of best-loved American novels in the United States. Stick around. You're listening to Think America. Reason first, and then converse. We're back on Think America. You can find me, Terry Gilbert, on Facebook, Terry Talk Radio, and subscribe to our podcast, thinkamericaradio.com. Hit the podcast tab. I want to talk about how To Kill a Mockingbird, that novel, Harper Lee's novel, came in on top as best loved. And surprisingly, it beat out the Harry Potter series, too. It's most likely, I think, because the themes of racism, crime, and injustice are rejected in this novel. Very famous novel, and it's all rejected. But it was rejected some 57 years ago, and yet we still have injustice, racism, and crime. So the question, Mitchell, is why, if those surveyed say this is the best, typical Americans that were surveyed on this, I think there were 7,000, 7,500 surveyed, something like that. Why then, if this is the American sentiment, do we have such racism, crime, and injustice that makes the news all the time?
First of all, I'm just happy to hear that people can still read, because I run across so many people who can't nowadays, or at least not well. Yes, it was a small segment that nominated the books. I get that. And it was PBS, which is definitely not a right-wing source. It is on the school's reading list still, so it's not surprising. It was written 80 years ago. I think it's got all the topics the left loves. It's got the black man falsely accused of something. It's got all of the things they like and champion the racism and all of this stuff. Personally, with regard to your question, I think racism is up because I think the government has been picking winners and losers for far too long, and I think a lot of people resent that. I mean, it started with affirmative action, then we had hiring quotas, then we had special entrances into college. They've all pitted us against each other, and then along came our president. I mean, all of a sudden, he's literally, in my opinion, the most divisive president in history. I mean, he pitted the rich against the poor. I mean, the black against white, legals versus illegals. That sort of stuff does not help. It inflames the issue. And then, of course, last, there's the media mantra that if it bleeds, it leads. They only like negative stories. They don't do anything positive.
Honora, I'm with Mitchell on most of that. I would say the chief reason presently is if it bleeds, it leads. Remember, the news media doesn't lead with status quo Ozzie and Harriet type stories. It leads with stories that are different, and certainly bleeding is different. It doesn't, for example, cover planes that are landing safely. It covers plane crashes. So we get racism, we get crime, we get injustice. All of that is going to be headliners.
Yes, typically I think the media has done all of that. However, I see two sides to this, Terry, about as far as racism today. We have wonderful, wonderful commercials where you see little kids of all colors, friendly, going over each other's houses. We see children's books that are of mixed race, and they're friendly. And we don't see racism in many ways in books that we had seen before. But yet on the other side, we have phenomenon that are happening And the media really, as you say, likes to see the bleeding and brings it out. But there is a truth side to it. For example, the rise of ISIS has now sunk in to the American psyche, thank God. And while Trump has done much to quell them, they are still alive and trying to get back and form their caliphate. And that made people aware that there are people who hate us and want to change us. And we have the growth of mosques all over our country, and the FBI is monitoring them. But according to reports by people like Robert Spencer, a lot of hate is preached in those mosques.
Mm-hmm, right.
We have an increase in immigration among people of color. We have Hispanics who come here not only for economic opportunity, but most, I do believe this, most come to be part of America. But we do have groups who come here who do not want to be part of America. They come here simply for economic gain. And among those are people from the Mideast and Arabic countries who don't want to integrate, who want to keep their community separate. And we saw what's going on with England in particular. And that adds to the separation of races.
All of those are factors. Were you surprised, Mitchell, that 57 years later, this book over, Lord of the Rings or Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen or the Harry Potter series actually made it to the top? You think of all of the themes in all of these other great American novels? Well,
it was like 1% of the population that voted, so I don't really know whether that's an across-the-board thing.
But you mentioned that before. It's not so small. It really is 72 to 7,500 people surveyed. That's not necessarily a small statistic for a novel. I mean, this is, this is just taking their pulse. And I think it's significant that this came out on top.
Well, for me, it would depend on who they sampled and who voted, because like every other poll, I never know what it means until I understand who it is they polled.
All right. We'll leave it there. Good comments all. When we come back, I'm delighted to bring Peter Wallison to the air. He is a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and he will describe what the administrative state is. And don't think it's the deep state. It's something else, and how they are controlling our lives. He wants them reined in. I'm Terry Gilbert. Find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Subscribe to the podcast. It's right there on the tab on the website. Be right back. I'm delighted now to switch gears and bring Peter Wallison to the air. Peter is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute out in Washington and former White House counsel to President Reagan. Plus, he was a former counsel to Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. And he's written a number of books, the latest of which is Judicial Fortitude, that America is at its last chance gulch, so to speak, he writes, to rein in the power of unelected administrative agencies, meaning essentially unelected officials who make rules outside of Congress, and they're under the executive branch. He'll explain. Hello, Peter Wallison. Welcome to Think America. Nice to have you, sir.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be with you.
All right. You describe in your book administrative state, and a lot of people are used to this term deep state. So I think in some respects, the deep state is embedded in the administrative state under unelected officials of the executive branch. What is the administrative state as you describe it in this book exactly?
The administrative state is just the federal agencies, hundreds of them, starting with the cabinet agencies at the top, Treasury Department, HHS, and so forth, and going all the way down to many, many smaller agencies like the SEC or the FCC. All of these agencies are subject to the same general rules, and they are the administrative state. When I talk about the deep state, and I don't often, the deep state to me has a sinister element to it. I think it's the intelligence community. That's the deep state. But the administrative state is out in the open. These are the agencies that make rules that the American people have to live by all the time. And this is what, to my mind, needs reform right now.
But in a sense, I think, at least in my mind, there is a sinister element after reading your book to the administrative state, because you argue they have just taken over with unnecessary regulation, separation of powers is compromised. They do rulemaking. We got rules and regs. And I'm reminded of three in particular: the EPA, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and this Title IX stuff that keeps creeping up with sexual harassment when it was never designed under sexual harassment, but more designed so that women wouldn't be biased with educational opportunities in colleges.
We don't have to talk about the difference between the deep state and the administrative state. We have enough trouble with the administrative state, as I define it, to worry about. But you are completely correct. The administrative state is out of control. And the reason for that, in my mind, is the court system. The courts have had a responsibility since the framing of the Constitution in the late 1800s to make sure that the separation of powers between the Congress and the executive branch is preserved. And basically, the courts have let us down. However, now I think we have 5 people on the court who are constitutionalists, who respect the work of the framers. This includes, of course, the 2 men who were just nominated by President Trump, Judge Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch. And they, added to 3 others who are already on the court, can make major changes in the powers of the administrative state by changing some of the decisions that have been made by the Supreme Court in the past.
How did we get here?
Well, in 1984, the Supreme Court adopted a decision called Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. And in that decision, they said that the lower courts should defer to the interpretation by the administrative agencies of the powers they received from Congress. No agency, even the president, has any power unless it is subject to and comes from a statute from Congress. And what this interpretation by the court did in 1984 was it gave the administrative agencies a lot of latitude to interpret their own authorities so that they could do lots of things that Congress actually didn't specifically authorize them to do. And the 3 areas you mentioned are great examples of that. I mean, what has been done by the Education Department under Title IX is really scandalous, because they've taken language that was adopted in 1972 relating to how schools should treat students. They all had to be treated equally, regardless of whether they were men or women. Women should have soccer teams and basketball teams and anything like that. Those things were supposed to be equal. But then, without any approval from Congress or any thought on Congress's part that this should be part of what the Education Department is engaged in, they established all these rules about sexual harassment, which don't involve the school at all. They involve the students with one another. So that was obviously not in the contemplation of Congress at the time, and they've made it this whole jurisprudence of sexual harassment, what it is and how someone should be tried for it and how someone should be punished for it. All of that stuff they just made up. And that's an example.
Well, not only, since we're talking about Title IX, but I remember distinctly under the Obama administration with President Obama himself broadening this Title IX idea with executive power, Peter, to include transgender students. And that made a huge uproar not so long ago, 2016, for example, 2017, which Trump has tried to rein in. Transgender students created a dust up in the bathrooms, in the locker rooms. And all of a sudden, this whole Title IX from 1972, which was supposed to not discriminate against women, has now been broadened into the whole transgender call for equal rights and so forth. And schools are very befuddled as to how to handle this.
Right. And it's just an example. It's in my book in detail, but it's just an example of how under the Chevron case, where the agencies are able to interpret the scope of their own authority from Congress, you can get things where agencies have gone way beyond what Congress ever could have enacted. And so that's why the book, and my view is that what we have to do is get the courts to rein in the administrative state. And we do have now.
So to understand for my listeners and people who are kind of new to what this administrative state is, Peter, would it be accurate to say that these administrative states, these agencies have kind of run amok? And so they haven't supervised themselves very well at all. And now it's time for the Supreme Court of the United States to take charge. Correct?
Yes, I think that's a good way to put it. They've run amok.
As I was going through your book, it occurred to me, Congress has the power to make laws. That's what they're there for. And within Congress, we have these judiciary committees. Why has the judiciary, which the American people has taken a look at quite a bit with the Kavanaugh hearings, for example, they now know what the Senate Judiciary Committee does and is all about. Good Lord, we talked about Kavanaugh for 3 weeks. But why didn't the judiciaries in Congress, in the House and the Senate, take a look at the administrative state run amok?
Well, many people in Congress have done that, but they've even in the House, at least, they've adopted laws that attempt to control the administrative state, but that has not ever gotten through the Senate. And I will tell you that this is a hopeless effort. They are too busy in Congress to take on legislation dealing with things that the administrative state is doing. Just to give you an idea, there are every year since 1993, there have been more than 3,000 rules and regulations coming out of the agencies of the administrative state. That's over 101,000 rules.
Judicial Fortitude, Peter Wallison, Wallison, the author. He's a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute. We need to leave it there, Peter, but I'd like to invite you back. Thank you. I'm Terry Gilbert, back with more Think America. Welcome back to Think America with Terry Gilbert. I'm your host. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I have Mitchell and Honora. Two people join me weekly to let their hair down on thought-provoking conversation starters. Let's get back at it. 5 journalists who write fictional thrillers were invited to the New York Times to, quote, conjure possible outcomes as to what could be in a mock idea, you might say, of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the so-called Russian interference. And one story written by a young woman called How It Ends is about a Russian assassin that, in a mock idea, shoots Trump with the help of a Secret Service agent. And the New York Times, Mitchell, published this on Sunday, October 28th. Now, this is right before the election. Should the New York Times have even had this? And secondly, should they have picked this ending by Zoe Sharp?
Well, this is just flawed across the board in my mind, and so much for the vaunted civility that the Dems insist they can bring back. I understand that this is the left-wing liberal fantasy, having the president die. I'm just trying to imagine how this would have worked if they had written something like this about Obama. I think all hell would have broken loose. And the New York Times excuse saying that it's just a work of fiction. And by the way, they said these were the 5 top spy and thriller writers. No, I read the top 3 spy authors. They're not on this list. The thing that bothers me about it is, 1, it's in poor taste. 2, its timing is poor. And 3, this is very sloppy writing. She obviously did no research. The Secret Service does not carry Glocks. They carry Sig Sauer P229s, and a simple internet search would have turned that up. So if she can't get the basics right, I'm not sure why anybody would read any of her books. And if this is New York Times' idea of a talented writer, I can see where their problem is. I mean, in the end, I think this just proves beyond any doubt that the left has really become unhinged.
Well, it just seems to me, and I agree with you, Mitch, that the New York Times indulged in a kind of resistance of their own through this fantasy to kill President Trump. So it's the power of suggestion.
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I mean, they do the same thing with polls. They make people believe that, oh, look, Hillary was going to win by 82% in the last election. It's as though the power of suggestion will somehow permeate time and space. I did find their quote for why they set this up and what the thinking was rather interesting. They led with something to the effect of, one of the biggest stories out there, of course, is that Mueller investigation and the relationship between Trump and Putin. And it's hard not to speculate about what might happen next. And on the basis of that, that's what they got these 5 writers to write about. Well, that has nothing to do with Trump and Putin, this particular woman's article. And no, from my perspective, it's not hard at all to imagine what's going to happen next. Nothing is going to come from the investigation. Nothing has come from the investigation.
You know, I was thinking about what you said with regard to poor taste. And what struck me, what came to mind, is House of Cards. That is set in Washington with all kinds of characters and all kinds of drama and sex and all of the, nasty stuff that comes with nasty politics. I can stomach that because there's enough of a distance, and you see it on Netflix and so forth, and it's a series and you can binge on it, Mitchell. But when it comes this close to an election in the New York Times that is considered factual reporting for most Americans that have that naked eye about what we talk about on the program, fake news and all of this, they don't see the difference. So I totally agree with you that the timing was very, very poor. Mitchell.
Oh, that was the day the pipe bombs started arriving, the false, the fake pipe bombs, right? I mean, granted, they couldn't have seen that coming, but they took poor timing and turned it into just absolutely ludicrous timing.
And the other thing is that the Secret Service agent becomes a traitor, that even the Secret Service, that they don't care. They are trained. It doesn't matter who the president is to their eyes. They're there to do a job. The president can be on the left, can be on the right, can be in the middle. It doesn't matter. They have a job. And she chooses a Secret Service agent above all the other so-called fantasy assassins to do the dirty deed. So, and the other thing that really bugged me about this, folks, is that the New York Times kind of acts like this is one of the biggest stories out there, and this could be the biggest potential ending. Well, when last I checked, even through this election, Mitchell, Robert Mueller hasn't finished up the biggest story yet. So it's a pretty strong swipe at the president.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
All right. When we come back, Change Your Life Technology is on board, and Megan Porth will be commenting on these 5 journalists who wrote fictional thrillers and get her take on all of this. I'm Terry Gilbert. Stick around. We're back on Think America with Terry Gilbert. Find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Subscribe to our podcast. You can listen to all archive shows that way. It's easy. Just go to the tab, download the shows. Megan joins us. Megan, we were talking about the 5 journalists who wrote fictional thrillers and were invited by the New York Times to conjure up possible outcomes to Robert Mueller's investigation. And you might know about this. One story got nabbed as the best ending. It was written by Zoe Sharp on How It Ends is what she entitled it. And a traitor Secret Service agent assassinates the president. This came out October 28th. I say talk about poor timing. Nasty politics. What do you say?
Definitely. It's really disturbing to me, actually, that the New York Times, it's one thing to request kind of some fictional works, right? I mean, the New York Times features different writers. That's what they do. But they have to be very, very cognizant of what they're putting out and the timing of it all, right, Terry? I mean, the fact that we have issues with pipe bombs, which are being sent, but also this close to the election. And not only that, but I have a lot of trouble with, even though I am personally not a fan of Trump himself, there are certain policies and actions that he's taking that that are in line with what I would like to see happen in the federal government. But I still, again, no matter how much I dislike an individual, whether they are a private or a public citizen, advocating for their death or their assassination, it's abhorrent. And in fact, it should be counter to what something a generally left-leaning publication advocates. They advocate for love and understanding and acceptance. And apparently that's not the case. If you disagree with them, then it is free reign that we can actually fantasize and write and publish and disseminate ideas on assassinating that person. If I were the New York Times, I would be disgusted by my behavior, unless, of course, Terry, I realize that the New York Times has been publishing horrific stories almost since its inception. So I can't say I'm surprised because it is the New York Times, but it is really the fact that it's accepted by the public is a little more disturbing to me than the fact that they published it. Because I'm probably like most people, I don't have a lot of faith in the news outlets that are out. Well,
and it's such a shame because it's supposed to be a news gathering and news explaining with facts, non-biased, poker-faced, maybe that's the best word for the American public, to the public. These are the facts, ma'am, nothing but the facts, that idea. And it is so far from that anymore. I'm not sure how to rein it back. It's one thing I was mentioning in the previous segment with Mitchell, when we have something like House of Cards and there's death and there's sex and there's nasty politics and stabbing in the back, and it's all good because we are at a distance and we know that that is a fantasy, though it's set in Washington. We know it's a movie, a television series. We have that understanding. But this is pretty raw and pretty nasty. And the idea that they're standing behind and calls it one of the biggest stories with this fanciful outcome. On the one hand, Megan, they say it's this big, big story, which we know is real because we know there's a Robert Mueller with the Russian investigation. And then they are hypocritical and say, yeah, well, this is just a fantasy ending. So how do you point out hypocrisy to a hypocrite that doesn't and can't hear it?
I don't think you do. I think you just have to flood the market with more information. That is how you fight this.
Correct. I mean, there is an old saying in journalism that when there's negative information or false information, you have to come back more and more with the truth as you know it. And it's kind of like the last person talking is the last person standing, right? Right. I think Megan is our house attorney as well. And I know in litigation, that's true, correct?
Right.
That is if the judge will let you, right? All
yes,
right.
exactly.
What do you got on Change Your Life Technology segment?
Well, I'm really excited about this new cryotherapy device to help treat breast cancer because I actually have a lot of breast cancer in my family. And basically the issue that we have, obviously, as you know, Terry, that removing a cancerous tumor can be really, really expensive and very difficult, especially in developing countries. Well, there was a doctor, Susan Harvey, the director of breast imaging out of Johns Hopkins, who actually challenged her medical students to come up with a cancer diagnostics and therapeutic system in South Africa specifically. And of course, her team of students delivered. The team is actually called Kubanda, which means cold in Zulu, and they use a cryotherapy probe that's inserted into the tumor and delivers liquid nitrogen and gas to freeze the cancer cells. They've come up with the disposable shot and it's less expensive now so that they can do this in the developing countries.
Thank you, Megan, very much. Thank you to Honora, and thank you to Mitchell for being on the program and coming round the microphone to your ear across America. I'm Terry Gilbert, Facebook Terry Talk Radio, and find the show on thinkamericaradio.com. Remember, reason first and then converse. See you next time.